All right, a lot of times when you're using a spreadsheet, you need to look up a value from another table, pull it into a cell. The XLOOKUP function is the modern accepted way to do this in Google Sheets, but there's another function that can do the same thing in a different way, but in a lot of situations it actually works better. So I have a spreadsheet here that we're going to go through. You can get your own copy if you want it. And we're going to go through a lot of different examples, decide which function works better in each situation. And then in the end, we can total up the scores and see which one we like better. All right, so this first example is just going to be a simple lookup and return. So we're looking for Richard, and we want to see what region he works in. In all these examples, you could just look over here, but usually when you use a lookup function, you're looking through hundreds or thousands of rows, but it's easier to visualize if we just use these small tables. So we will look up Richard, look for the region he is in, and we'll do it with the XLOOKUP function. So this would be your standard way of doing it. It used to be VLOOKUP, but XLOOKUP has replaced it. It's just easier to use. I'll reference another video on comparing those two right now if you want to look at it. But XLOOKUP first wants the search key. So it's purpose built for doing this. It's saying, what am I searching for? So you're going to give it the cell reference of H10, which contains the value of Richard. You could also just type in the word Richard surrounded by quotes, but we'll use these cell values. And it's asking, where should I look it up? So you're going to tell this function where the names are. And you see that Richard is one of them there. And then XLOOKUP asks, well, where are the results? What do I return? So you give it this next range of E11 through E14, and you're done with XLOOKUP. Close out the parentheses, hit enter, and then return south. So that's right? Richard works in the south region. It's pretty easy. But we're going to come over and we're going to accomplish the same objective with the filter function. So the filter function, it isn't purpose built to do lookups. It's built to do pretty much what the regular filter does that you access through the menus. But it turns out that it can do lookups pretty well. So let's do one. We'll do the filter function. And it's asking for the range to filter. So we want to return the region, right? So we're going to give it the range of where the results are that you want. And then it's asking the condition. So the condition is when the values in N11 through N14 are equal to Richard. So we're going to use the cell reference of where Richard is. And we'll close this off with the parentheses. And there you go. It did the same thing as XLOOKUP. And when you look at it, it's actually only 2 arguments instead of 3. So we gave it the range and we gave it only 1 condition. So if you come over and look at XLOOKUP, it was relatively simple too. There's 3 arguments here, but they're both about the same complexity, right? In XLOOKUP, you don't have to do the equals to. So we're going to say these are about the same. So we'll come over to our scoreboard and we will we're going to do a total of 10. So we're going to split this one even. I'd say XLOOKUP gets a 5 and filter gets a 5. So the grand total right now is that they're tied. So I'd like to take a minute to thank a few of my viewers. YouTube has a feature where you can give a creator what's called a super thank. So it's kind of like a tip. I've gotten a few of those over the past several months. These little tips help to support my channel and I appreciate them very much. So thanks, Gabriel. Let's come back over, do the next example. Scroll down a little bit. And here we're going to use XLOOKUP to return more than 1 column. So this is a big deal for XLOOKUP because its predecessor VLOOKUP could not do this. But XLOOKUP can, and we'll show you how it does. So the search key again is Richard. And we want to look up, well, first it wants to know where to look up. So we'll say, hey, these values that you're looking up are in D21 through D24, just like they were last time. But the result range is what we're going to change. And in XLOOKUP, you can just make that 1 wider if you want. So you can return more than 1 corresponding value. And we're done with the XLOOKUP function already. Hit enter and it can return south and aluminum. So his region and his specialty. Right, so let's come over and try to do this with the filter function. So we are going to say filter, But what we want to filter and return are these two columns. So we want to filter O21 through P24. Right now there's just one condition. So we're saying when the value in this range is equal to Richard. Hit enter and you get the same result. So both of these functions are able to return multiple columns, and they're able to do it pretty easily. None of them even got longer or more complex. So again, both of these functions are very capable of returning multiple columns. So we are still at a tie. Let's come down to the next one. And this is something that is pretty neat in XLOOKUP. What it can do is deal with an inexact match. So we're shifting gears here. Right now we're acting like we're a teacher, and we're trying to figure out what letter grade an 87% is. So you have to come over to this table and you have to look up 87%. You have to not find it and then figure out what letter grade you want to return. So in XLOOKUP, we do that by doing the following. The search key is 87%, and the lookup range, so where you're going to find an inexact match for that, is E31 through 35. You want to return the letter grade. And now the interesting part comes in. So we're not going to return a missing value message right now. So let's do another comma to skip that parameter. And let's expand this help text to see the explanation for match mode. And we want to say -1 because we want to look for the exact match or the next value that is lower. So it will come to the 90. It's not an exact match. So we'll look for the next value that is lower. So this is a pretty intuitive built-in way to do an inexact match. Inexact, not exact. And that will be by specifying a -1 for the match mode. All right, we'll close this off, hit enter, and it returns a B, which is what we're looking for. So we're still just using one function and we're using the given parameters. We did get into some optional parameters, but still not too hard. We'll come over and try to do the same thing with the filter function. But with the filter function, this is going to be just a different way of thinking about it. The filter function is fundamentally different, but this is going to bring out some of those differences. So we'll type filter. And the range that we're filtering is the letter grades. But the condition, there is no concept of an inexact match with filter. What you need to do is build a formula that's going to work with these conditions. So what we want to try to do is say that the condition is when these percentages are less than 90, so we'll start there. We'll say less than the percentage there. But what happens when we do that is if we just close this off and hit enter, here's where you see one of the big differences between the two functions is that the filter function can return an array. And when you're doing a lookup, you don't necessarily want this. So the filter function did return everything less than 87, right? That's the B, the C, the D, and the F. But we only want one value here. So the filter function really can't do what we're looking for. You can do a workaround. What you can do is surround it with a sort in function. So the sort in function will do a sort, not a filter. But then you can specify how many to return and in what order. So it's a very capable function. You won't see it used very often. It's probably underrated. But what we're going to do here is we're going to sort that output, that array that you just saw. So we'll leave the filter function in the middle. And the in value is how many values to return. And we just want one. And we just want the first value. So you don't need anything else for the sort in function, although it has a lot of other customization you can do. We're going to close this off and hit enter. And there we go. So we got the filter function to do what we wanted. It wasn't pretty though, because we had to surround it with another function. So I'm going to give a pretty clear win here to XLOOKUP. I'll give it a 9, but we were able to get it done with filter, so I'll give filter a 1. There's no good reason to use the filter function in this example, but it can be done. All right, we'll move on to the next one, and this is how to use a not found message when you're looking up values. So if a lookup function can't find a value, it typically just displays an error, and that error is not very informative. If you have another user looking at this, they're not going to know what's happening. So in XLOOKUP, what you can do is, let's say we're looking up Phil, but we know Phil isn't in here, right? We're going to try to look him up though. We'll go in that range. The result range is here. And if you don't specify a not found message, you just get that in a error. So what XLOOKUP allows you to do is, see where it says missing value in the help there, you can just say sales rep not found. Surround it in quotes, and it will return that helpful message, right? That tells you a little bit more than just an error, because you know the formula is working. It's just that Phil isn't in the list. So if you come over to the filter function, filter doesn't have a built-in way to do this either. So spoiler alert, filter's not going to lose every one of these competitions. So stay with me here, but I'll show you the ones that will lose, which is what we're doing right now. So filter, we're going to filter the range of where the regions are, and we're going to do it where they are equal to Phil, which is nowhere. We'll close this off, and filter function gives an error too. But filter function does not have a built-in error handling system like XLOOKUP does. But what you can do is you can just surround it with another function, and this function is called if error. I'll copy this onto my clipboard. We'll go in and we'll start with the if error function. And what that does is it wants the value first that there is no error. So if there's no error, I want it to go ahead and run that filter function. But if there is an error, which is the next argument, let's go ahead and say sales rep not found again. Set off, try it. There we go. So we do have the two functions doing the same thing. XLOOKUP has it built in, so you're still only using one function. In filter, we had to wrap it in the if error function. It's not the end of the world. It's still pretty readable, but it's not as elegant as XLOOKUP. So we're going to come over to the scores. Little drum roll here. I would give the XLOOKUP definitely the win. So I'll give it a 7. But filter's still all right there. It's hanging in there. So I'll give that a 3. So now we'll do an example where we want to search from the bottom up. All right, so if you look at Randall, this is a list of grades. Randall got a 78, but then he got an 82. So we're going to say we're going to look for his latest grade. We'll say these are in order, right? This is, the bottom one is the latest. In XLOOKUP, again, it has built-in functionality to do this. So we'll say XLOOKUP, search key is Randall, the lookup range is here, result range. All right, so we have those in. We'll hit a comma. The first one is missing values, so we don't need to use that argument. The next one is match mode. We're going to skip that. And now we want to look at search mode. And let's go down to the verbiage for that. And it's going to say how to search through the lookup range. So we want to go to -1, which is from the last entry to the first. All right, so we'll specify a -1. Close this off, and easy as that. Okay, so XLOOKUP is just looking through this table backwards. For the filter function, the same thing is going to happen that happened previously, is that we're going to have to wrap it in another function. So we'll use trusty sort in again. So I'll just start by wrapping it. But then we'll do the filter function. We're going to filter the scores where the students are equal to Randall. Right, but that's going to return 2 items. So we're going to use the sort in function, and we're going to use it to return only 1. So that's the n. We'll skip the display ties mode. Now we're going to say the sort column is the first column, but what we want to do is make the is ascending false. So that just makes it look through it backwards. We'll hit enter, and there we go. So we looked through this list backwards with the filter function, but again we had to use 2. It's not very intuitive at all. So again, XLOOKUP, clear when gets a 9. Filter function goes down to a 1. All right, but now we're going to do something where the tables will turn a little bit. We're going to see a reversal of fortunes. And the first thing that we'll do is try XLOOKUP, and we want to return more than one value. So we'll do XLOOKUP. We'll look at the search key Randall. We're going to look him up over here. So as we know, there's 2 values for Randall, right? Because there's 2 percentage scores for him in there. Result range is where the scores are. But there's no way to return more than one. So none of these parameters will allow you to do that. It's just not what XLOOKUP is for. Okay, so XLOOKUP, a lot of times you'll be using XLOOKUP through a column with lots of different rows, and you can't have the rows overlapping each other, so XLOOKUP just doesn't do that. So we'll end it here. It's only going to return a 78. But for Randall, if you want all of his scores, it's going to be easy. We're going to look through all of these scores, and we're going to say it's where the student is Randall. Close it off. In the filter function, because it can write an array, it makes it just easily win this competition. It is purpose built to return more than one value. So we'll come over to the scores, and filter's going to make up some ground here because the XLOOKUP, sorry, got a 0. It's not even in my drop-down list, so I'll just have to type it in. I got an error there because someone didn't build their data validation right. It's mad at me for doing a 0. We'll get over it, and we'll give filter function a 10. So it's catching up some ground. So we'll do this last one. This is going to be the deciding function. I can't wait. I'm pretty nervous. Let's see how both of these functions do with matching multiple criteria. So what we want to do, we want to look up the sales rep that's in the North region and specializes in aluminum. Okay, so there are 2 sales reps from the North region, but only one of them specializes in aluminum. So we're going to try to return the sales rep value of John. And first we'll do it with an XLOOKUP. So this can be done with XLOOKUP. And the key of what we do here is we are going to join values together. So the search key we're going to say is North, and then we'll use the ampersand to concatenate that value with aluminum. So right now what it's looking up is North aluminum, squished into one word. So when we do the lookup range, we're actually going to have to use an array formula to join these values. And we're going to join the regions with the specialties. In the result range, we're just going to say the sales reps here. Close this off, and it returns John. So you can get the XLOOKUP to work. This is not intuitive, right? I think you'd have to do some searching on the internet to find out how this works. At least I did, but it does work. You do have 2 functions here though, right? You have the array formula and the XLOOKUP function. So it's like earlier when we were trying to get the filter function to work and having to use sort in. It's not really built in. You have to put it together yourself, but it does work. All right, so we got XLOOKUP to work. But if we come over to filter, we'll see that this is more intuitive in this situation. So we're just filtering the sales reps. And here's where this is so easy, is that you can just specify more than one criteria natively in this function. So we'll say the region is equal to North. And then we'll just come along and say the specialty is equal to aluminum. Close that off, and it returns John. So this one, filter function definitely won that. The XLOOKUP could do it, but it needed another function, so we'll give filter an 8. I did not go through this scoring beforehand, but I think I can see, well actually, okay. It looks like a very close call, but XLOOKUP did win this brutal competition. And you can see why, because it's more purpose-built for doing lookups, but there are definitely situations where the filter function makes more sense. If I missed any of the features, be sure to let me know in the comments, because there's a lot to know about these 2 functions. And let's take a look now at how the XLOOKUP function is replacing VLOOKUP. So if you've been using spreadsheets for quite a while, you're probably comfortable with VLOOKUP, but the XLOOKUP function, spoiler alert, is just better. So if you want to learn why, I'll see you in this next video. Thanks for watching. Great to have you along.